Welcome back to Alex and Mark, our third chess video together. I'm FIDE Master Alex King. I'm now officially a FIDE Master as of a few days ago.
Hmm.
And Mark Louderback is my friend and student. And we are going to, in this video, be um, looking at a game that was played by neither of us, but that was played by Gary Kasparov in 1986 against Robert Huebner. And a little
Also in 1986.
also, yeah, Huebner was also in 1986, yes. So, a little background about this game. This game was played in a tournament in Brussels, Belgium, and it was in late 1986, shortly after Kasparov had played his third World Championship match against Anatoly Karpov. So Kasparov had just successfully defended his World Championship title against Karpov a few months earlier before he played in this tournament. And this game was played in round eight of this tournament in Brussels. And Kasparov did end up winning this tournament by a considerable margin, 7.5 out of 10. And so this was pretty late in the tournament. I'm sure he was already leading. I'm not sure by how much, but yeah, he ended up finishing in first place by like 2 points. This was a six-player double round robin tournament. So Kasparov and Hubner, and then four other players, and so everybody played everybody else twice. So this was the second time in the tournament that Kasparov and Hubner were playing. Okay, so Kasparov's playing white. And by the way, for our viewers, Mark has not seen this game before.
I've not.
I have, but he has not, and he can't see the upcoming moves. So I'm going to be asking him questions about the upcoming moves that he's going to have to answer with his very own brain.
That
Okay,
is correct.
um, so D4, D5, C4, C6. So this is the Slav. Mark and I are both um, D4 players generally with
Hmm.
white, so we both have experience against the Slav. And Kasparov goes knight c3, knight f6, e3. So the reason for playing this specific move order is to avoid the classical Slav. If white played knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, or even just the move order that he played knight c3 first and then knight f3, Black would here have the option of playing d takes c4, the so-called classical Slav. Whereas with the move order that Kasparov's chosen, e3, now d takes c4 is not as useful of a move for Black because White can just take back in one move with his bishop like this. Um, so like he wouldn't have to, in the classical Slav, after knight f3, d takes c4, White usually needs to invest a move in a4 to prevent Black from holding on to the pawn with b5. And a4 is otherwise not the most useful move. For example, it weakens b4. And so Kasparov is just avoiding that. e3. Now he doesn't have to worry about d takes c4. He doesn't have to worry about the classical Slav. He does have to worry about some new options. Like, for example, Black could play bishop f5 here, but that's not what Hubner played in the game. In the game, Hubner just played e6, knight f3, knight d7. So now we're back into like the semi-Slav. That's what's going on here with this triangle. You have a question, Mark?
Yeah. So if, from my understanding though, and because I always play knight to f3 first, all
Right.
right, and the idea is that if you're not doing that, then Black is going to have the option to push out to e5.
Yes, that is
Um,
another possibility that White is allowing by playing knight c3 here. I think Black can play e5 here, and Black can also, I think, play even d takes c4 here. That's another possibility. So, yeah, even though he's avoiding the classical Slav, he's certainly allowing some new possibilities. Not that those possibilities are like clearly good for Black. It's just, they're all just different lines. So, but
So in a
anyway,
game
okay,
like
so
this, which is played before, before computer use was sort of rampant. Obviously, that a computer is back in those days. Blah blah blah. I get that. But before the the extended use that we have now, and being able to analyze and understand, do you feel as though that the move order and the opening here, that this is still something that is, just as solid and would be played at the grandmaster level today, as opposed to, I mean, obviously at the, my level and all that, we play whatever the heck we want to and all.
Yeah, no, I don't think there is anything like discredited about this move order nowadays. I think it's still used nowadays. So it's not some sort of antiquated backward move order that Kasparov used that was later found to be wrong. I mean, first of all, even though Kasparov was always on the cutting edge of opening preparation, even before computers, and then right from the very beginning of computer use in chess. I mean, he was an absolute pioneer in using computers for opening
Mm-hmm.
preparation. So um, I'm sure he was already using computers to whatever extent was possible at the time in his chess work and in his opening preparation. Um, so all of that is to say that if this were a line that were suspicious or dubious, he would have already known about it back then because he had absolutely the most resources and the best preparation of the time. And there's not a lot that Kasparov played that later became discredited because he was doing high quality stuff, even without computers. So yeah,
Okay.
so there's nothing wrong with this. It's just an option. And like I said, like in the game, Hubner just went back right into a normal line, the semi-Slav here. So
Mm-hmm.
and then Kasparov played the main move here, which is bishop to d3. But now in this position, Hubner played a somewhat unusual move. He played bishop to b4. So this
Hmm.
is not one of the main moves for black. The most common move for black is to just take on c4 because
Right.
then white has to waste another move with his bishop taking back, and then black can play b5, and then we get into some of these main lines of the semi-Slav, which are very,
Mm-hmm.
very heavily analyzed, and they already were very, very heavily analyzed at even at this time in the 80s. But Hubner's move bishop b4 um, has a little bit of actually has a very subtle point to it. So Kasparov just kicked the bishop, a3, forced the bishop to decide what it was going to do, and then Hubner played bishop to d6. So instead of playing bishop to d6 in one move, Hubner played bishop b4 and then bishop d6. So he like intentionally provoked this move a3. Now you would think that that would not be very useful to provoke an the move a3 because a3 would seemingly be sort of useful for white anyway. So it's like why would
Sure.
black want to provoke it? But actually, we're going to see a little bit later what Hubner's idea was in provoking a3. So I'm going to leave it a mystery for now. I'm not going to ask you to guess what the reason is because it's extremely
I would
subtle.
have guess, no
It's
guess at
extremely
all. But
subtle.
yes,
You'll
I
see.
mean, it does seem A3 would seem to be a standard move, and I mean, even in this position and all that, I mean, following it up with a pawn to B4, I mean, it just seems
That
like
could happen
you'd
at
be like,
some
yeah,
point. Yeah, that could happen at
absolutely,
some point. So it's definitely a mystery to people seeing this game for the first time why Black would do that. But you'll see. Okay, so Kasparov played e4. So this is a possibility for white when black has not thrown in this d takes c4 move. Like after d takes
right, right,
c4, black is already causing a distraction, and white will probably get to play e4 later, but he can't play it right away. But with the move order that Hubner chose, Kasparov, white can play e4. So Kasparov plays e4, and uh, black takes, knight takes, knight takes, bishop takes. Okay, so whenever we get like a pawn trade, especially in the center, it's usually useful to pay attention to how that affects the overall pawn structure. What that transformation implies from a structural perspective. So the pawns that have been traded are black's d pawn and white's e pawn. So those
mm-hmm.
pawns are now gone. And the pawns that are remaining, at least in the center or near the center, are like these pawns for white and these pawns for black. Now, white's remaining pawns are more farther advanced than black's remaining pawns in the center. So white now has a space advantage, which he did not have before this pawn trade, right? Before this pawn trade, the farthest advanced pawns for both sides were equivalently far advanced, right?
Hmm.
So neither side had a space advantage. But then after this trade, black traded off his most advanced pawn, and white's remaining pawns are still just as far advanced. So white has a bit of a space advantage in the center of the board, and this is a very standard pawn structure. This pawn structure that arises, um, it can arise very commonly out of the Slav, and it can also arise out of some other openings like the Caro-Kann. For example,
Hmm.
like, you know, if we get one of these variations of the Caro-Kann where the same pawn trade occurs, d takes
Right.
e4, we have the same pawn structure. White's got his d pawn here, black is missing his d pawn, and then we've still got these like other pawns that are uh, the same structurally as what we have in the
Right.
Slav. So some people call this pawn structure the Slav or the Karo-Slav pawn structure. Um, okay, so black Huebner plays e5. This is um, this is an attempt to sort of neutralize white's space advantage immediately by trading off this advanced pawn for this pawn, and then both sides' center pawns will all be cleared out. That's sort of like the strategic goal that black has here is to eliminate white space advantage, clear out the entire center, and hope to reach like a symmetrical pawn structure where black will have chances to like equalize. That's at least the ideal scenario for black. So e5.
And when you say immediately, I mean you really do mean that because white or black at any point could have castled. There are any kind of other little sort of waiting prep moves that they could have done for this, but they choose not to.
Well, they do.
What is the incentive to be so hitting the iron here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I think they could have castled before doing this E5 move, and they do castle right now. They both castle, so I think it would have just transposed if they had castled first, and then black could have still played E5. I don't think it actually makes a difference.
Okay.
So maybe there is a subtle difference, but if there is, I don't know what it is. So E5 and both sides castle. Um, all right, now here is where we're about to examine the black's idea in provoking A3. So um, it actually looks like white can win a pawn by force here by playing d takes e5. Sorry, this is the move he played in the game, bishop c2. But it looks like he could have instead played d takes e5, knight takes, bishop takes, and then this bishop is loose. And so white has this tactic, bishop takes h7, check. King takes, queen h5, check. Here, here.
Hmm.
So this would win a pawn for white, but this was actually what Huebner was hoping for. This was part of Huebner's preparation, um, because then after queen to d3, he would be able to create counterplay against this. And here's where having provoked a3 is useful for black because white can't just play b3 defending his c pawn because that square is no longer defended with white's a pawn having moved from a2 to
Mm,
a3. So, like, if we compare this to all the way back here in the opening, if black had just played bishop d6 without having played bishop b4, provoking a3 first, and everything else was the same, all the other moves were the same.
right, right.
Takes, takes. Now this is actually just bad for black. Now this is just like white wins a pawn. If black tries to do this, b3, everything is defended. Black has almost no compensation for the pawn that he's down. So this would just be bad. This is just like an opening trap that black would have fallen into. So the fact
Hmm.
that Huebner provoked a3, it's like he's trying to intentionally fall into this trap because he's prepared. He's analyzed that it is like an inferior version of this trap for white, where black actually does get some counterplay with his queen, sort of lurking and intimidating white's queenside pawns over here. So, and actually, the reason why I know that this was Huebner's preparation to do this is because he later played this exact way in a game the following year in 1987. He reached this exact position against another grandmaster, Nikolic, and actually White ended up winning that game too. But this at least demonstrated that Huebner was going for this. Okay, so anyway, like I said, Kasparov didn't play all of that. He just played Bishop C2, as I mentioned earlier. So the idea of bishop c2 is, the bishop was on a loose square here on e4. Now it's on a safer square, and he's also ready to play queen to d3, creating a battery that's going to hit h7.
Right.
All right, so black played rook to e8,
Mm-hmm.
preparing preventing queen d3 because then e4 would occur.
Right.
So white plays rook to e1. Now again, white is ready to play queen d3 because now e4 would not be possible because of rook takes e4. And now finally, Huebner releases the tension in the center by playing e takes d4. And now these rooks get traded, and Kasparov takes back here with his queen. Okay, so black has achieved his strategic goal. He has successfully traded off both sides' center pawns,
Right.
right? Both the d pawn and the e pawn for both sides, and the remaining pawn structure is symmetrical. So the
Mm-hmm.
fact that white's c pawn is slightly more advanced than black's c pawn is not actually that important of a factor. I wouldn't even
No.
say that it constitutes fully like a space advantage for white. Certainly not like in the center of the board. White doesn't have any space advantage. There's like no more pawns there. So again, it's essentially symmetrical. That's what black is hoping for. Sort of clear out the center and try to equalize from a symmetrical pawn structure. But despite that strategic situation, from like a concrete perspective, from like a dynamic perspective, Black has sort of spent some time doing this. He's a little bit misplaced his pieces in order to achieve the strategic goal. He's got his queen on this sort of slightly passive square compared to White's queen on a very active square. This
Mm-hmm.
bishop is currently hanging compared to like this bishop, which has already retreated to a very comfortable, safe place. And like White already has some pressure over here, and black's king side is a little bit like undefended. So just like black has some concrete problems that he has to watch out for before he can like claim victory, strategically speaking. All right. So
So
um
in this position,
yeah.
okay, I mean, are you sort of saying that, computer would probably see it as being, even or unclear, um, but you would rather be white?
Well, yes to both of those things, and not just that I would rather be white, but that even if it is objectively equal or close to equal, black has to be careful because one wrong step, the margin of error is smaller for black because his pieces are a little bit misplaced. And so if he does something wrong, there's a lot more opportunity for white to pounce on that. So
Mm-hmm.
black just has to be more careful. It's practically more difficult for black, even if objectively he's fine. So, and we'll see that that's what ends up happening to Huebner. He does end up committing some missteps and getting in trouble, and Kasparov pounces on him. So, okay, so black's bishop is hanging. He retreats it to e7 here. And then I want you to think about what you would play here as white, Mark, and then we'll compare that to what Kasparov did.
Well, you know, I feel as though I would want to be activating my weakest piece, and therefore some sort of move that, um, perhaps moving my pawn forward here, for with the idea of getting my bishop out and allowing my rook, to sort of get to a good square, perhaps even on um, this e file here. So I'm going to say that there was a. I'm going to say that the play was b3.
B3 has a tactical problem, Mark, which is that bishop
Ah.
f6. Now, it may be that white would have some sort of counterplay, but I don't think it's enough to compensate for a whole rook. So you're going to run into a tactic there. So Kasparov does try to activate these undeveloped pieces, but he just develops his bishop right away. He plays bishop to g5.
Hmm.
Now, this offers a trade of pieces, um, but sometimes trading pieces can be effective when you're ahead in development because, like, black only has three developed pieces compared to white's four developed pieces. And when the bishops get traded, which they do, now it's instead of 4 against 3, it's 3 against 2, you know. And
Right.
anyone who's played like pickup basketball knows that it's 3 against 2 is a bigger advantage than 4 against 3. So trading off the pieces and leaving black with even fewer developed pieces, it sort of makes sense in general, even though white's playing dynamically here. And so okay, so also knight after knight takes g5, like white is hitting this guy here.
Right.
And so this is actually the moment where Kubner plays probably not the best move. It's not like a huge mistake, but probably not the best move here. He plays knight f6, which is a natural looking move.
Right.
Get
Right.
his
That's
knight
what
out of
I
the
would
way
have
of his
thought.
bishop and defend the
Mm-hmm.
h7 pawn. I think it would have
Right.
been a little bit better to play h6 though, because then, kicking white's knight back um, would be useful. You'll see why the knight is effective on g5 for other reasons besides just hitting the h7 pawn. So knight f6, and then Kasparov does develop his rook here. Um, he plays rook to d1. Now, I know that you were thinking about bringing the rook to e1 earlier,
Yes.
but actually d1 is a good square. Um, D1 is I mean, obviously he can't play rook to E1 here right now because the square is hanging. But D1 uh, has benefits. There's benefits to having the rook on D1 instead of E1 anyway, because now it's actually difficult for black to develop his bishop. Okay, he's got many squares. Well, he's got three squares that he can move it to safely, but some of them are actually not safe. Like if he moves the bishop here or here. Like, for example, let's say he goes bishop d7.
Mm-hmm.
It's defended twice, but this knight is overworked because it's also defending h7.
Right.
And we can take advantage of that by playing like bishop or knight takes h7. Let's say we go knight takes h7 and then takes takes here and then here, and then black would lose a pawn. So it black can't play bishop d7 without losing a pawn, like
Mm-hmm.
this. Same thing with bishop to g4. Bishop g4, same thing. We can take, 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 and white wins a pawn.
Right.
And actually, this was black's best option because now black could again, as like similar to what we saw earlier, black could again try to cause havoc uh, in white's queen side with his queen after white's won this pawn. This
Right.
actually wouldn't be the end of the world for black. This would have been his best option to give up a pawn and then try to create counterplay with his queen. But after rook to d1, Huebner played a different move. He played bishop to e6, the one bishop move, uh, safe bishop move that we haven't looked at yet. But this is actually worse than what we just looked at. Even though this is safe, it's worse because now Kasparov plays rook to e1.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's actually even stronger because now we're going to be able to, pretty much no matter what on the next move, take here. And then when black takes back, he's going to have a weak pawn on
Right.
e6. It's going to become isolated. So that's what happens. Huebner played queen to d8. Kasparov just took on e6. Black can't even trade queens because then the knight would escape. So black has to just take back on e6. And now this pawn is weak. And not only is the pawn weak, but like the remaining minor piece imbalance is favorable for white because white's bishop has a lot of scope, is pressuring black's king side, and black's knight over here, um, it's somewhat restricted Like it can't go to these, well, it can't go to some of these squares anyway, right? So it's
Right.
restricted and it's also not attacking anything of white. So it's sort of passive. So
Hmm.
white now has sort of converted his development advantage, his temporary development advantage, into something more static and long term, which is like um, better pawn structure and better minor piece. And especially the pawn structure is a static thing. That's not something that's going anywhere anytime soon. So this is very common for advantages to be transformed from like dynamic ones into static ones, or vice versa, from static
Hmm.
ones into dynamic ones. So, okay. Now, Kasparov avoids the trade of queens. He he plays queen to e3. Notice that he would not be able to just win black's loose pawn here, because then again black would have a lot of counterplay
Right.
against his queen side here. In fact, I mean black would just win back the pawn right away. This would be bad for white. So that's why he keeps the queens on. And now again this pawn is just going to hang. So Huebner just moves his king away. And Kasparov um, doesn't even take this pawn right now. If he takes this pawn, he would have to again worry about this sort
Right.
of counterplay, and or maybe queen d4 is also possible with the same idea, or maybe queen b6. So there's a lot of queen moves he would have to worry about, and he just decided that he's not going to worry about those because he doesn't have to. This pawn is going to be weak in the long term, and so he doesn't have to
Hmm.
rush um, into capturing it. And so he plays a different move. So knowing
Coming back
that
to
he,
that, Alex, hold on a second.
yeah, yeah,
Coming
yeah.
back to that, I mean, do you think that that's kind of an important point for for like club level players like I am, um, to sort of realize that when you opponents have a weakness, especially with an isolated pawn or something along those lines, that capitalizing on immediately is not always necessarily the best play. That sometimes it's just a matter of sort of playing patient and kind of, knowing that it's always going to be there. You're always going to have that opportunity, to sort of pick it up, pick it off, or use that to your advantage.
Yeah, and it's also a matter of weighing it against your opponent's piece activity. So in this case, you have to be aware that taking a pawn could come at a price of allowing your opponent to activate one of their pieces in a way that could cause problems for you. And so your piece activity has a value in chess, just like material has a value. And it's not like material is the only thing that has a value in chess, right? So you have to weigh it against, like, is it worth letting my opponent's queen get really active and harassing me to capture this pawn right now? And if you feel like it's not worth it, then yes, it often is okay to just let it be and not harvest the pawn yet, to try to keep control of the position, and not let your opponent try to take control. So, but anyway, with that in mind, Mark, what um, what could we do here besides taking the pawn? I mean, we have all of our pieces developed. So what's next? What do you think White could play here?
Well, so I guess there's two ways of thinking on this. Number one thing that you could be working is to sort of be like, look, um, you know, as it's not obvious that it's going to be happening immediately, but we don't want to have any sort of a back rank issues with white and in this situation here. Um, Plus, you're going to be able to kind of control the square that black's knight is going to go to. So a move like h3, taking control of I keep forgetting that I have controlling the G4 square so that the knight can't pop in there. Plus giving your king a little lift and all that. That seems to be you know, uh, seems to be a move. Seems to be a move. A
That's what
slow
he did.
move, but seems to be a move.
No, that's what he did. Good instinct, Mark. That is what he did. He played h3, and it's for exactly what you explained. Gives the king some square, some air, and also controls this square so that the knight can't go there. So multi-purpose move, absolutely. H3.
Hmm.
And then black plays queen to d7. So still tempting Kasparov to snatch this pawn and then let the queen come in and start harassing the queen side like this. Kasparov again doesn't do it. Actually, Kasparov plays a move in this position that was very unexpected and surprising to me when I first saw this game. In fact, the move he plays here was what really caught my attention about this game in the first place when I first saw it
Okay.
many years ago. So the move he
Hmm.
plays is g4.
Hmm.
So Mark and I have a sort of inside joke about this move G4 because we've looked at
Yes,
a lot
we
of his
do.
games where like G4 would have been a very strong move, and Mark was very averse to playing it because he was worried about it weakening his king side, and that is an important factor. But eventually, we've gotten him to like start playing this G4 move in some of his games, and Kasparov, certainly doesn't have that aversion. I mean, he happily plays g4 here. So g4 actually sort of builds on h3 because now g4 is like further restricting squares for this knight, right? So like
Right.
both of these squares are now unsafe for the knight. The knight is like getting progressively more and more restricted. And yes, it does open up White's king a bit, um, but um, Kasparov has just sort of judged that he's going to keep that under control. It's not going to be any sort of factor that's too dangerous. All right. So Hubner finally takes the opportunity to protect his e6 pawn, although now he's hanging this pawn. So
Right.
Kasparov has a chance to try to snatch that pawn. Um, and actually, I think he should have done that. I think the best move for
Really?
Kasparov would have been to, first of all, occupy the open d file and then snatch this pawn. I think that would have been his best option. What he played was queen e5. So he's basically um, he's just continuing to try to improve his pieces. He's preventing black from advancing his pawn is one important thing that he's doing with queen e5. He's just blockading it. He's standing in front of it so that that pawn can't move forward and start getting active. Um, but yeah, I think it would have been better. I think he sort of waited a little bit too long to cash in, and I think this would have been a good opportunity for him to cash in and win this pawn. And even though Black would then be able to advance this pawn, I don't think that would have been the end of the world. I don't think that would have outweighed the fact that White would have captured a free pawn here. All right, but he didn't do that. He blockaded the pawn, and we'll see how that gives Black some extra opportunities a little bit later. So Black retreats his queen. Now he wants to come out like this and get active like this.
Hmm.
And so the next move that Kasparov makes, I think, is nice. He plays king to g2. So he is already thinking prophylactically about like when Black's queen comes here, it'll be putting pressure on this dark square diagonal. And so it makes sense to put the king on a light square where just in case there's not going to be any accidents, like the f pawn won't be pinned once Black's queen comes to b6, and there won't ever be some sort of check or whatever. So he's just making his
Right.
king a little bit safer. And Black goes ahead and plays queen b6, but I actually think this was a mistake by Hubner, and that he had a better chance to. I think a better move would have been knight to d7. And then if White's queen, let's say, retreats here, then I think queen b6 would be more effective. I think actually, trading queens is in Black's best interest here because with the queens traded, he would actually have better chances of using his king to help defend his weak pawn here without worrying about his king coming under some sort of an attack. So I think this would have been a better defense by Black, trying to play queen b6 one move later and then try to trade queens. So okay, so he played queen
What
b6.
about just playing D2 again? I mean, this has always been the threat that.
Right, right. Okay, so he could have played queen d2 here. Let's see, I haven't looked at that. I think if Black plays queen d2 right now, I think that White can just play rook e2, I believe, and
Mm-hmm.
then um, and then maybe it doesn't amount to anything for black in this specific case because like the queen is already protecting this,
Right.
and I think like actually everything is okay. Meanwhile, you know, black has to worry about possibly this g5 move, kicking the knight somewhere. I don't know. I think it just looked too dangerous for black to play queen d2. Interesting
Mm-hmm.
idea though. Okay, so he played
So,
queen
but the
b6.
protection of the B2 pawn. I mean, is that another reason for going queen to E5? I mean,
Right.
you are
Earlier
sort of
back here, yes,
holding
queen
the.
e5. Yeah, you're right. Protecting b2 is another benefit of having the queen here, besides just blockading this pawn. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it did multiple things for sure. And I guess that's maybe um, another reason why here it would have made sense for Hubner to play knight d7 because that evicts White's queen from this strong square here, where it does those things. And then the queen has to go to some slightly worse square where like it's no longer protecting b2, and that's why now queen b6 is like more irritating for White because now, you know, now this is hanging, and so maybe he would need to trade queens, and then again that would let the king come in and it would be safer for black. So anyway,
Right.
so queen b6 Hubner played. Kasparov played rook to d1. So now he's occupying this open file and further restricting black's knight. I mean, black's knight has almost no safe moves at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
The only safe place it could move to is like g8, which is obviously a terrible square. But yeah, he can no longer move here or here or here or here or here. So this knight is very restricted. Now, if black were to play rook to d8 here, challenging white on the open file, then after takes. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. There's something even better. I'll let you think about this, Mark. I was going to say that we can take and then win this pawn. Actually, there's something
Mm-hmm.
much better. If rook d8 is a blunder, white would be able to play a much stronger move here. See if you can figure out what it is.
All right. So it isn't.
It's not just trading rooks and winning that pawn. Something that pay off much more than that.
I guess I would sort of have to say that it would be, you know, pushing your uh, pushing your pawn forward here,
Then maybe the
putting a little
knight could still
pressure
go
on
to
the.
d7. Now d7 is safe. But better than that. Check this out, Mark. We could play this, removing the defender of this rook, because the queen cannot come here, and the only other place to move the queen to still defend the rook is here,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's fully evicted from the diagonal, and then the rook hangs.
Mm,
So
that's
actually, black
slick.
can't play rook d8. He would just lose his rook. It would just be losing for black. He would lose material immediately. So in the game, Hubner played c5 first, preparing
Hmm.
to play rook to d8. Um, but Kasparov provoked it with bishop a4, and Hubner again decided against playing rook d8 because if rook d8 takes, we collect a pawn. Yes, black's queen could get active at that point, but then white's queen would also get active, and now black would have to like paralyze his knight, and white could like collect another pawn while like covering all the checks and defending this,
Yeah.
and then he can't play this because of this. I don't know. It would. I mean, it would. This wouldn't solve black's problems either. So after bishop f4, Hubner just moved his rook here to f8. So notice that like material is still equal. Kasparov has still not cashed in. He's still just he's focusing most of his energy on making his pieces as good as possible, as
Mm-hmm.
active as possible, and on making his opponent's pieces as bad as possible. And he's succeeded in that in many ways. Black's knight has been very restricted for like the whole middle game. Now Black's rook is, not on an open file. It is on a semi-open file, but it's not immediately doing anything. Okay, so Kasparov continues to activate his pieces. Rook to d6.
See, I picked out that move, I tell you.
There you go. There you go. Okay, so the queen has to move. Kasparov collects this pawn. And so at this point, Kasparov is okay with trading queens because he's up a pawn.
Right.
So if black trades queens here, um, that's not going to solve his problems. He's going to be down a pawn, and this is hanging, and the rook could come back here and attack new things, and that's going to
Yeah,
still be
yeah.
very bad for black. So after rook takes e6, Huebner plays queen to f7. So he's now setting up a sort of sucker punch along the f file, where if white's not careful, black might be threatening like knight takes g4,
Right,
followed
right.
by queen takes f2 with some sort of attack on white's king, leading to a perpetual check or even mate. And so white has to be careful about that. But here Kasparov wraps up the game with a nice tactic involving just allowing black to execute his threat. So he plays queen takes c5,
Huh.
allowing knight takes g4. First of all, queen takes c5 hangs his rook, but then black's rook would also be hanging. So
Right.
that would not do anything but just trade rooks for black. So but in the game, Huebner played knight takes g4. So it's like Kasparov is allowing Huebner to execute his tactic, and now he's threatening queen takes f2. And why did Kasparov do that?
Well, because now the queen is protecting f2. I mean, the punch is not as strong. I mean, you can simply take, you can take the knight. If he comes in, then you take here on f2. That's what I would sort of naturally assume.
You're right. But what about after h takes g4, queen f3 check? He might still be going for some sort of perpetual check. It might still be difficult to hide white's king. It might not have any stable shelter. So actually, Kasparov doesn't play h takes g4. He plays a different move here. That move may be okay for white, but what Kasparov played is much clearer.
Does he bring his bishop back to
That would defend everything, yeah, but it's not a defensive move. The move that Kasparov plays is like it's a forcing move. Let me show you. He goes queen takes f8 check. Queen takes f8. Now he could just win the queen back,
yeah,
but he has an even better move. Now he plays h takes g4 because rook e8 is unstoppable anyway.
right.
And so now that he's just taken the knight, when he goes rook to e8 and trades his rook for black's queen, he's going to still have his bishop. He's going to just be up a piece. There's nothing black can do to stop that. Because if he moves the queen away, then rook e8 is going to be a back rank mate. And if he moves the queen this way, still rook e8 forces this. And if he moves the queen here, still rook e8. And if he moves the king, then still rook e8. And if he, gives his king a square, then still rook e8. So no matter what, rook e8 is coming. White's going to end up a piece and a pawn for nothing here. So black resigned here.
That is clever.
This is
That
where
is
Huebner resigned.
absolutely,
Yeah,
that was
cool
quite the
game.
move there.
So even though this game does have, this nice little finish here, this sort of flashy finish, I think that for the most part, this is a positional game. This is a
Hmm.
game where you really get to see like the principles of piece activity and the principles of like um, transforming an advantage from being temporary to being static, and then transforming the static advantage into a tactical, concrete thing like this. And so Kasparov was really great at active dynamic play. And that doesn't always manifest in tactics here. I mean, the tactics was just like the final 10% of this game. The whole 90% before that was like dynamic play that was more positional in nature. and so Kasparov was especially good at that. I really like Kasparov. He's like one of my favorite players, and yeah, his sort of like dynamic positional, his like normal moves almost are just like very inspiring to me.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's one of the reasons why I like this game. Okay, any unanswered questions about this game, Mark, for you?
No, no. I mean, that's it, certainly, as you said. I mean, it is just kind of it's a slow pressure. It is a you know, it's just some good solid chess that really, as you say, it really just sort of allows him to um, to just kind of slowly turn it on his opponent. And so then when you have this little tactical, flourish at the end, um, you know, uh, he's just beating him with with a bishop, right? I mean,
Yep.
that's sort of what the game has come down to. I mean, he's got one extra pawn on there, but it's really just sort of the just one extra piece that's going to be able to to actually win this game.
Yeah, totally. Great game. And this is not one of Kasparov's like more well-known games either.
No,
I mean, I
no, it
haven't
isn't.
seen it in a lot of like books or videos or anything. I haven't like checked to see whether someone else has already made a video of this, but I know that there's not a lot of coverage of this game already, but it's a great game, so more people should know about it. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Mark, thanks as always for co-hosting. Again,
Always
I'm
glad.
FIDE Master Alex King, my friend and student Mark Louderback, and we hope you have enjoyed watching this third video of ours. Check out our other videos on my Alex King Chess channel, and we'll hopefully release another video soon. So until then, take care.